We usually think of the Bible as just one single big book. But what if I told you it's actually an ancient library? In this explainer, we're going to dive into how this huge collection of scrolls, written over centuries by all sorts of different people, came to be seen as one unified story with a single, powerful message. So, just how big is this library we're talking about? Well, the Protestant Bible alone is a collection of 66 individual books. That's 66 separate works, each with its own vibe and context, all bundled together. And get this, those 66 books weren't written by just one person. Nope, they were written by about 40 different authors from completely different walks of life. And that's where things start to get really interesting. Now, think about the timeline. This entire collection took roughly 1,400 years to write, from the earliest texts all the way to the final book of the New Testament. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible span of human history to cover in just one volume. So that leads to the big question, right? With so many authors, across so many centuries, and in so many different styles, how on earth did this ancient library ever become seen as a single, unified book with one cohesive message? How is that even possible? Well, the first clue to answering that question is actually hidden right in the name itself. The word Bible gives us our starting point. You see, the name Bible comes from a Greek phrase, ta biblia, which literally means the little scrolls. So from its very name, it's telling you, hey, I'm a collection of separate writings, originally jotted down on rolls of papyrus. The name itself says it's a library. And wow, what a diverse library it is. Just think about the authors for a second. You've got these highly educated scholars like Moses and Paul writing alongside farmers like Amos. You've got fishermen like Peter and John, priests like Ezekiel, and even a non-Jewish doctor, Luke. This incredible human variety is absolutely at the heart of the text. Okay, so if the writers were so different, what's the unifying force? What holds it all together? This brings us to a really core idea that's supposed to explain the Bible's unity, the concept of divine inspiration. There's this key phrase from the New Testament book of 2 Timothy, and it claims that all scripture is God-breathed. Now, the idea here isn't that God just kind of gave the writers a good idea, like a muse. The belief is that God literally breathed life into the words themselves, giving them a divine energy. Now, different translations handle this phrase a little differently. One might say, inspired by God, which sounds like a poet getting a spark of inspiration. But another, which is closer to the original Greek, says God breathed. And that small difference is actually crucial. It points to God as the direct source of the words, not just some passive influence. And that brings us to this dual nature of the text, which this quote just sums up perfectly. It is a thoroughly human book, written by real people dealing with real-life situations. But the belief is that through all those human hands, a single divine voice comes through. Okay, so if there's a single divine voice, what is it actually saying? What's the plot that connects Genesis all the way to Revelation? Well, the perspective we're looking at here says there is one main storyline that runs through everything. And here it is. The single thread weaving its way through all 66 books is the story of salvation, God's plan to redeem humanity. From the fall in Genesis to the life of Jesus and the start of the church, this is presented as the central plot of the whole shebang. This brings up a really important question. How do the two testaments, the Old and the New, actually connect? This quote from Jesus is seen as central. He presents his teachings not as a replacement for the older scriptures, but as their ultimate fulfillment. The New is positioned as the completion of a story that the Old began. And you can see this unity popping up everywhere in these common themes that run through the entire library. Ideas about God's nature, the problem of sin, the promise of a Messiah. These concepts aren't just in one section. They're developed bit by bit across hundreds of years and dozens of books, creating this really cohesive theological tapestry. So this all raises a pretty big question, right? Why does a book this ancient still hold so much relevance for people today? The theological answer we're exploring here basically breaks down into three key parts. So it all starts with the belief in a living God, one who didn't just speak in the past but still communicates through these words. From there, because God is seen as true and consistent, the Bible is then considered a completely trustworthy source for understanding our world. And that leads to the final step. It's seen as an authoritative guide. The logic is, if a creator made us, then that creator has the authority to provide an instruction manual for life. But, understanding this library isn't always straightforward. There's one last really vital point about how to read it. It's not enough to just read the words. We have to see them through the right lens. Here's a great way to think about it. The Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. Each and every book was written in a specific time, to a specific culture, and if we don't understand that original context, we can completely miss the boat on the meaning. Let me show you a really fascinating example of this. So, a lot of us have probably heard this famous line from the book of Revelation, right? The church in a city called Laodicea is condemned for being lukewarm. And we usually assume that means they weren't passionate enough, that they were apathetic. But what if that's not what it meant at all to the people who first heard it? Okay, let's look at the plumbing of ancient Laodicea, because the city's local context is everything. The city had no good water of its own. It piped in hot water from nearby medicinal springs. That water was super useful. It also got cold, refreshing water from mountain springs. That was also really useful. But the water that got to the city through a long aqueduct was lukewarm, filled with chalky sediment, and dangerously contaminated. It was literally poisonous. And that changes everything. See, the problem wasn't a lack of passion. Both the hot and the cold water were valuable and useful. Being lukewarm meant you were contaminated, you were useless, and you were poisonous, something you'd spit out immediately so you didn't get sick. Suddenly, that cultural context gives the phrase a whole new, powerful meaning. This example just perfectly captures the final takeaway. The Bible is presented as this unified library with a single grand story. But to really get it, we have to become cultural detectives, digging into the ancient world to understand what these words meant back then, so we can even begin to grasp what they might mean for us now. And that leaves us with a final thought. If context is this critical, what does it truly take to bridge thousands of years and understand an ancient text today?